A champagne flute shattered in her hand. "Don't look at me," the Mafia Boss said softly. "Look at her. The one kneeling in the glass. Bring me that girl. My name was Adriana Bellini, and I was never supposed to be in rooms like that. Rooms with senators smiling too hard, diamonds blinking under chandeliers, and men so dangerous. The silence changed shape when they entered. In 2 minutes, a waitress would bleed on imported marble, and I would press a white napkin over her hand before I ever looked at the man everyone else had come to worship. In 2 hours, I would be in the back of his car with my phone gone, my future locked outside the bulletproof glass, and his voice in the dark calling me a name that felt like a warning. I had one secret sewn into the lining of my evening coat, a page my dead father left behind. It would either clear his name or bury all of us with him. Chapter 1. The Broken Flute. I had spent the first 40 minutes of the party trying to disappear behind a 16th century Madonna. That was not a metaphor. It was a real painting. Tempera on panel, gold leaf halo, restored by the studio where I worked, and delivered to Palazzo Viscara because my employer had a fever and said, with the selfish cheerfulness of old men who had long ago stopped fearing elegant rooms, "Smile, Adriana. Rich people love a girl who looks like she apologizes for existing." I did not smile. I carried the painting through marble halls and into a ballroom lit like heaven had accepted sponsorships. Crystal chandeliers, white orchids, men in dark suits with the kind of stillness that did not belong to politicians or bankers, their jackets pulled too cleanly at the shoulder. Armed, I thought at once. Italian moved through the room in polished currents. Laughter, champagne, expensive perfume over old stone and wax. And then the room shifted. It did not get louder. It got quieter in the specific way prey goes quiet when the wolf steps into snow. I saw him without meaning to. Dante Salvatore stood near the bar with one hand in his pocket and the other holding a low crystal glass he had not touched. Tall. Dark suit, no tie, white shirt open at the throat. He looked younger than the fear around him suggested, and older than his face had any right to. He was not smiling. He was not pretending to. Everyone else in the room leaned toward someone. He leaned toward nothing. The first thing I noticed was not his face. It was the sound. A clean metallic click. He had flicked open a silver lighter, then closed it again without lighting anything as if he needed the sound more than the flame. A woman in emerald silk laughed too loudly at his side. He did not look at her. A senator began speaking to him with both hands already out, already eager. Dante turned half an inch away. Ignored everyone at the party, I would think later. That was true, not because he was bored. Because contempt had hardened into habit. I should have looked away. Instead, I watched the woman in emerald touch his sleeve, watched his expression not change at all as one of the armed men beside him removed her hand for him. That should have been enough warning for any sane person. Then the flute shattered. A waitress near the west column fumbled a tray. A tall glass slipped, hit marble, and broke sharp and bright. She gasped and grabbed for the pieces on instinct. One sliced across her palm. Blood ran fast. The tray hit the floor. Someone cursed because champagne had splashed their shoes. No one moved toward the girl. No one. Except me. I set my clutch down on a pedestal I was reasonably sure held a funerary urn older than Christianity, and crossed the floor before I could think better of it. The waitress's eyes were wide with humiliation, not pain yet. Pain always arrived a half-second late. "It's all right," I said, kneeling in the glass. "Give me your hand. I'm so sorry." "Up," I said softly. "Pressure first. Sorry later." I took the white linen napkin from my lap and wrapped it around her palm, pressing hard enough to stop the worst of the bleeding. "Higher. Keep it up. Is there ice nearby?" I don't know." "Then look for a kitchen door, not the floor." That was when the room changed again. I felt it before I heard anything. A silence folding toward me. Another click. The lighter. "Don Salvatore," someone murmured nearby, warning and reverence mixed together. I did not look at him. The girl's hand was slick under the napkin, and if I let up too soon, it would start again. You need stitches, I told her. Not many. 2, maybe 3. A man's voice came from above me. Deep. Even. Too calm. That girl, he said. Bring her. The waitress made a small startled sound. I closed my eyes for one beat. Of course he would mean me. That was how men like him worked. Someone bled and still the room bent toward him. I kept pressure on the girl's hand. She needs help before I do. The words came out before survival could intercept them. A few people inhaled. When I finally looked up, Dante Salvatore was watching me with an expression so unreadable it felt worse than anger. His eyes were almost black. Not empty. Not cold. Those were easier things. His gaze was focused in a way that made the rest of the room feel badly drawn. He crouched in front of me himself. Expensive fabric folding over marble dust. No one around us seemed to breathe. Who are you? He asked. Busy. That was stupid. I knew it as soon as it left my mouth. The corner of his mouth shifted. Not a smile. The memory of one maybe from another life. What's your name? Adriana. Last name. I hesitated. That cost me more than the first answer had. His eyes dropped to my face, then to my hands around the waitress's bleeding palm, then back. Last name, he repeated. Bellini. Something moved behind his expression, fast and dark. The man to his right leaned in. Boss. Dante lifted one finger. Silence. The waitress whispered, Please don't get fired. You're not getting fired, I said automatically. Take her to the kitchen, Dante told one of the servers without looking away from me. Get the house doctor. Now. The server moved at once. When I released the girl's hand, my own palms were marked with little crescents from gripping too hard. Dante stood and offered me his hand. I looked at it. Large, steady, a silver ring on the smallest finger, no visible blood anywhere. I can stand up by myself, I said. I know. That, somehow, was worse. I rose carefully, ignoring the splinter of glass in the hem of my dress. He was close enough that I could smell him now, something clean and dark. Cedar over cold night air, as if he had been outside where the garden dropped toward the lake. You ignored me, he said. I was helping someone. That's why I noticed. His voice stayed low. Private, almost. Around us, people pretended not to stare. I should have apologized. I should have given the explanation everyone wanted from women in rooms like this. Too much nervous chatter. Too many soft edges. Instead, I said, Then you noticed the right thing. A beat passed. Then he looked at the blood on my napkin and said, Mercy. I frowned. What? That's what you look like. His gaze held mine. Until proven otherwise. A joke would have broken the moment. A threat would have simplified it. He offered neither. One of his men returned, bent close, and murmured something in his ear. Dante's attention sharpened. Where? The man answered too low for me to hear. Dante looked back at me. Who invited you tonight? My employer. The restoration studio. Name. I gave it. And who gave your name to the host? I don't know. He studied me for 2 seconds too long. Then he held out his hand again, not for courtesy this time. For compliance. You're leaving with me. No. A few nearby guests suddenly found the ceiling fascinating. I didn't ask. I'm not getting into a car with a stranger. That did it. Not visibly, not theatrically, but a line sealed somewhere in his face. You know my name, he said. And if I were a stranger, you would already be gone. I should have run then. I should have called for help, though I understood with a sick little turn in my stomach that help in that room wore his suits and answered to his nod. Instead, I asked the wrong question. Why? He stepped closer, close enough to lower his voice without lowering its force. Because someone used your name tonight, he said, and men do not make moves around me without a reason. I opened my mouth to argue. His lighter clicked once more in his hand. Adriana Bellini, he said, almost gently. You don't get to go home. The door closed behind me an hour later with the heavy, final sound of a lock set from the outside. Chapter 2. The Locked Wing. The first thing I learned about Dante Salvatore's villa was that the doors were honest. They did not pretend to be decorative. Walnut, iron, old hinges, real weight. When they shut, you felt it in the floor before you heard it in the air. The second thing I learned was that panic sounded embarrassing inside expensive rooms. I tested the handle, twice anyway, locked. Do it a third time, a male voice called from the corridor, and the door will get offended. I turned so fast the borrowed silk robe slipped off one shoulder. A man stood outside the open inner gate of the suite carrying a tray with coffee, sliced pear, toast, and an expression of deep personal betrayal. He was broad-shouldered, neatly dressed, and about 35. His black hair had been flattened as if he had lost an argument with rain. A scar nicked one eyebrow. He took one look at my face and sighed like a Catholic man disappointed by predictable suffering. Good. You're awake, he said. The boss hates when captives faint before breakfast, ruins the schedule. I'm not a captive. He glanced meaningfully at the locked door. Of course not. You're a very exclusive guest with perimeter restrictions. He stepped inside and set the tray down by the window. Morning light poured over the lake beyond the glass, turning the water into hammered silver. I'm Gianni, he said. Driver, logistics, occasional hostage to Maria's cooking. Who's Maria? The woman trying to kill me with focaccia. I stared at him. He put a hand to his chest. You laugh now. Yesterday she brushed olive oil on bread in front of me and said, "Smell this and suffer." There are war crimes with less cruelty. Despite myself, my mouth twitched. He pointed at me. There, human, good. Eat before Dante comes in and the air pressure changes. I went still at the name. How long am I staying here? Johnny's face lost some of its comic elasticity, until it's safe. For whom? He spread his hands. See? That's the exact kind of question that causes me stress wrinkles. I need my phone. No, it wasn't a request. Then we are both being brave before coffee. I cross my arms. If he thinks he can lock me in a room and call it protection, the boss does not think, Johnny said dryly. The boss decides. Thinking is for the rest of us, and frankly, it has not improved morale. I almost smiled again. Almost. The room itself made resistance feel smaller. High painted ceiling, white curtains breathing inward with the lake breeze, a carved armoire, a bed too large for one person, no clutter. No softness except a blanket folded at the end, thick wool, gray. Nothing in it said prisoner. Everything in it said controlled. My evening dress hung over a chair where someone had cleaned the blood from the hem. That bothered me more than if they had left it stained. It suggested care. Attention. Someone here had seen the mess I carried in and quietly repaired it. A knock sounded once. Johnny straightened, and there goes my piece. Dante entered without waiting for permission. Dark suit again, though it was barely 9 in the morning. A white shirt, sleeves buttoned, no jacket this time. The room tightened around him in a way that had nothing to do with size and everything to do with certainty. Johnny stepped back on instinct. I hated that I noticed such things. Dante's gaze flicked to the untouched tray, then to me. Eat. No. Bad strategy. I don't remember agreeing to strategy. No, he said. You seem to prefer defiance. Johnny made the sign of the cross under his breath and drifted toward the door. If anyone needs me, I'll be in the kitchen begging Maria not to seduce me with carbohydrates. Johnny, Dante said. Yes, boss? Out. He left at speed. Silence settled, not empty. Heavy. Dante crossed to the window and stood with the lake at his back. He did not sit. Men like him probably made chairs feel temporary. I spoke to your employer, he said. You're on leave. My pulse kicked. You had no right. I have all the rights that matter this morning. That isn't how rights work. His expression did not change. In your world, maybe. I hated how often that sentence had been true in the past 12 hours. I lifted my chin. Then, explain your world. No. A laugh escaped me then, sharp and humorless. You kidnapped me, put me in a locked room, and refused to explain why? I brought you here because your last name opened a door I've been trying to force for 3 years. Cold moved under my ribs. My father is dead. I know. The answer came too fast. I stared at him. How do you know? He held my gaze without discomfort, without apology, because I buried one of the men who put him there. My breath caught. For a second the room blurred at the edges. My father had died 2 years earlier in a warehouse fire on the industrial edge of Como. That was the official version. A drunk guard, faulty wiring, bad luck. It had been printed in 3 small papers and forgotten by everyone except the daughter who had spent months smelling smoke where no fire existed. You're lying, I said, but the words lacked structure. No. You don't get to say things like that as if... I broke off, pressing my fingers hard into my palm. If you know something about my father, you tell me now. Not until I know what he left you. I told you, he died. That wasn't the question. I looked away first. I was ashamed of that, more ashamed that he noticed. My father restored church panels, I said carefully. He repaired frames. He taught me how age settles into wood. That's what he left me. Dante said nothing. I could feel him waiting. When I finally looked back, he had taken the silver lighter from his pocket and turned it once through his fingers. He did not click it this time, just held it the way some people held patience deliberately under strain. Your father also laundered ledgers through antique frames for Vittorio Caruso, he said. The name meant nothing to me then. The feeling did. Wrongness. Old and deep. That's impossible. Is it? My father was not a criminal. Dante's jaw shifted. That is not what I said. Then what are you saying? I'm saying men like Caruso hide their sins behind holy things. Your father was useful to them. Then he stopped being useful. I stood too quickly, anger arriving before balance. And now I'm useful to you. A beat. Yes, it should have made me hate him cleanly. It did not. Honesty was a harsher thing. He stepped closer, slow enough that I could have moved away if I wanted to, which annoyed me more than if he had cornered me. If Caruso believes you have something of your father's, he will come for you. I don't have anything. Then pray he believes that. My throat tightened. Why should I trust you? You shouldn't. The answer struck harder than reassurance would have. But, he said, you should understand this. If I wanted you frightened, Mercy, I would not have locked only the outside door. The nickname hit differently in daylight. Colder. More precise. I hated that I heard the difference. He glanced at the untouched tray again. Eat, then dress. I'm showing you something. What if I refuse? His gaze settled on my face, then lowered briefly to my bare feet on the marble, then rose again. The gesture was so minimal no one else would have called it dominance. I knew better anyway. Then you'll still dress, he said. You'll just do it angry. He turned and left. At the threshold he paused without looking back. The east wing is locked for your safety. The west terrace is not. If you need air, take it there. If you try the main gate, the men outside will stop you. Politely, if possible. That little addendum unnerved me most. Politely, if possible. Then he closed the door. Not slammed. Not hard. Certain. I stared at the wood grain until the tray's coffee went cold. Chapter 3. The Hidden Saint. If Dante Salvatore wanted me dressed and compliant, he got half his wish. I put on the charcoal skirt and cream blouse someone had hung in the wardrobe, brushed out my hair, and followed one of his guards through the villa with all the stiffness of a church girl marching toward sacrilege. The villa was worse in daylight. Night made power dramatic. Day made it domestic. There were family portraits in the hallway, oil landscapes over old sideboards, a bowl of lemons in the breakfast room, fresh flowers and a chapel alcove off the south corridor. Money had made the place beautiful. Grief had made it careful. Nothing unnecessary survived here. Men nodded to Dante's name as we passed. No one asked mine. The guard brought me down a narrow back staircase to a room that smelled like varnish, beeswax, and old dust. I stopped so fast he nearly walked into me. It was a restoration room, tables under angled lamps, soft brushes laid in order. Cotton gloves, solvents, magnifiers, a humidity monitor on the far wall. My fingers twitched before I could stop them. Dante was already inside, coat off, sleeves rolled once. On the table in front of him lay 3 small devotional panels and 1 cracked frame with its backing removed. "You built a workshop," I said before I could think whether surprise counted as weakness. He looked at my face, then at the tools. "I bought one. My mother cared about old things. Your men don't seem the type. My men aren't allowed in here without reason." I moved closer to the table despite myself. The panels were 15th century, maybe early 16th. The central one showed St. Sebastian, arrows half lost under darkened varnish. The wood backing on the frame was newer than the gilding. "My father worked on this," I said quietly. Dante watched me say it. "How can you tell?" I pointed to the miter joints. He repaired corners with pear wood when he could get it. Everyone else used pine because it was cheaper. My fingers hovered over the back but did not touch. And this fill line, he never sanded it completely smooth. He said perfection on an old object looked like a lie. Something unreadable moved through Dante's face. "Well?" he asked. "You think there's something hidden inside. I know there was." I drew on cotton gloves. No one stopped me. Then whoever opened it before didn't understand frames. "Show me." I should have refused. I should have held the skill back, made him bargain for it. Instead, the work took me. That happened sometimes. The world narrowed into cracks and grain and the small, intimate logic of damage. I tilted the frame against the light. A shadow line caught under one side of the inner rabbit. "Not there," I murmured. "There." Dante came around the table. Close. Not touching. I felt the nearness anyway, like temperature changing before weather broke. "That panel was rebuilt," I said, "not to strengthen it. To make the thickness uneven. There's a false channel inside the left rail." He handed me a thin, lifting blade without being asked. I slid it into the seam, wiggled, angled, pressed. The wood gave with a soft sigh. Inside the rail was a narrow hollow and, tucked within it, a strip of paper wrapped in oilskin. Dante went still in a way that made the room feel armed. I drew the packet out and set it on the table. "Don't open it with your hands," I said. "If it's old ink, your skin oil." He already had tweezers ready. I looked at him. "You expected me to know that?" he asked. "No, I expected you to tear it." His gaze stayed on mine 1 second too long before dropping to the oilskin. Inside was not a letter. It was a sliver of ledger paper covered in tiny notations, dates and initials, shipping codes, 3 bank names, and 1 repeated mark. VC Dante's mouth flattened. "Caruso. You said that name yesterday. He's the reason you're here." I pointed to the page. "This is accounting. It's laundering routes." "How do you know?" His eyes lifted from the page to my face. "Because half the names on it are dead." The words put iron in the air. I looked back at the slip. The handwriting was not my father's, or not quite. Some of it was, some added later. Different nib pressure. Different impatience in the loops. "This was altered," I said. Dante's attention sharpened. "By whom?" "I don't know yet." I touched the margin without touching the ink. "There are 2 hands here. One careful, one hurried. If I had a lamp and reagents, I could separate them." He studied me the way men study cliffs they have nearly driven over. "You can do that?" "Yes." "You're 24. So? So most 24-year-olds can barely separate laundry." The insult should have landed. Instead, I looked up and found his mouth almost soft at one corner. It startled me enough that I said, Most mafia bosses can't identify pearwood, so perhaps we are both full of surprises. A pause. Then, from somewhere behind us, Johnny muttered, "Christ, she's suicidal." I turned. He stood at the door with a tray of espresso cups, Maria behind him with a folded towel over one arm and disapproval on her face. So sharp, it deserved legal registration. Maria assessed me in one glance, Dante in another, and put the towel down. "He has not fed you enough." "I offered breakfast," Dante said. "She is still upright from spite," Maria replied. "That is not nutrition." Johnny pointed sadly at a pastry on the tray. "Maria brought sfogliatelle for everyone except me, because apparently my body is a temple." Maria sniffed. "No, your body is a complaint." Against all reason, I laughed. A real one this time, small and sudden. Dante looked at me, not at my mouth, at the sound. That felt worse. Maria set a cup near my elbow. "Drink before the room gets more dramatic." She left. Johnny lingered just long enough to stare meaningfully at the pastry he had not been given, then followed her out with the air of a martyr abandoned by heaven. I looked back at the hidden paper. If this matters, why show me? Because you're Bellini. That's not an answer. "No," he said, "it's the only one you need today." He reached past me for the lamp. His hand brushed the inside of my wrist by accident. Neither of us moved for half a second. My pulse jumped so hard it embarrassed me. His finger stilled, then withdrew. Too late. Almost. The word flashed through me before I knew why. Dante set the lamp down carefully, as if care itself were restraint. "Work," he said. But his voice was rougher than before. Dante. The first thing he had noticed was not her face. It was the white napkin turning bread in her hands while she refused to look at him. The second was how still she became when she touched damaged things, as if she believed repair deserved reverence. Men died for less than what lay hidden in his workshop. He should have kept her away from it. Instead, he found himself watching the fine bones of her wrist under his fingers and thinking, with a fury he would have killed in anyone else, that if Caruso saw her like this, he would understand exactly where to strike. Chapter 4. The Candle Between Us. By evening, I had separated 3 layers of deceit from one strip of paper and learned that mafia accounting looked disappointingly like ordinary accounting, only bloodier in consequence. Different inks fluoresced differently under filtered light. Old carbon black held one way, newer iron gall another. My father's marks, if they were his, were disciplined, precise. The additions slashed across them like impatience with rules. Routes had been changed. Amounts inflated. Names replaced. Someone had altered records after the original sheet was hidden. When I showed Dante the distinction, he called Sofia Conti. She arrived in a navy suit, 30-something. Severe in the elegant way that made you suspect she sharpened knives for relaxation, dark hair in a knot. No wasted movement. "So," she said after I explained the ink separation, "the dead men were laundering for Caruso, and someone inside our structure amended the route sheets later." "Our structure?" I repeated. Sophia's gaze slid to me. Not unkind. Not warm. "Stay long enough, Adriana, and you'll learn everyone belongs to a structure. The lucky ones simply know which one." I did not like her at once, which probably meant she was intelligent. Dante took the paper from her hand. "How many people had access? To old vault inventory? 8. To this room? 5. Sophia folded her arms. "To you? Too many." He ignored that. I said, "If there are more frames from the same chapel commission, there could be more hidden slips." "There are," Dante said. "Where?" "Warehouse." Sophia looked at him. "No." Dante looked back. "Yes." I understood then that their arguments were old and expensive. An hour later, I was in the back of an armored car between Teo Ricci and a metal case full of lights, lenses, and solvent swabs. Teo was younger than I expected, maybe 28, with the kind of face mothers trusted and men underestimated. He handled weapons the way a pianist handled scales, nothing theatrical, only exactness. He had brought me bottled water, a wool coat, and the information that the warehouse floor would be cold. That tiny care made me like him immediately. Don't mistake me for kind, he said as if reading it. I'm only practical. If you freeze, the boss gets worse. The boss gets worse? Tio glanced toward the front where Dante sat with Johnny. You're new. Johnny twisted around from the passenger seat. If he glowers any harder, the tires will deflate from shame. Dante did not turn. Gianni. Yes, boss? Silence. Gianni sighed. See? Hostile work environment. The warehouse sat at the edge of the lake behind rusted gates and a line of cypresses bent by old weather. Inside, the air was damp and smelled of rope, oil, and whetstone. Men spread out through the dark, while Dante led me toward a row of crated altarpieces under plastic sheeting. I shivered once. His coat settled over my shoulders without warning. I looked up at him. I didn't ask. I know. The words landed differently now. Less hard. Not soft. Something more dangerous than softness attention. We worked by portable lamps. I opened one crate, then another. The third held a panel of the Virgin with a vertical split through the center and a backing I recognized at once. My father did this one too. Dante stood beside me, close enough that I could feel the heat of him through his coat. Can you open it? Yes. Carefully. Do you think I generally use violence on paintings? No, he said. Only on men who interrupt you. I looked at him. He was not smiling. My fingers slipped on the blade. Stop. His voice sharpened. I froze. He took my hand, just took it. Strong, warm, completely certain. Drew it back from the frame. A bead of blood welled where the thin metal had kissed my thumb. Ridiculous, how such a small cut could change the air. His gaze dropped to the blood. Everything in him went still. Not calm. Still. I felt the shift travel through his body and into the hand holding mine. It's nothing, I said. He did not answer. The warehouse lights flickered once and died. Darkness swallowed the room. Men moved at once. Safety catches. Steps. Italian too low and fast for me to track. Then the silver lighter clicked. A flame rose between us, small and steady, gilding the angles of Dante's face. His eyes were on my thumb, as if the tiny bead of blood had reached across years and touched something raw. Boss, Tio called from the shadows. Stay where you are, Dante said. His voice was flat, dangerous. He lifted my hand toward the flame, examining the cut. The gesture should have felt clinical. It did not. The pad of his thumb touched the inside of my wrist, where the pulse ran thin. Dante, I said, and did not know why I said his name like that. His eyes lifted to mine. For one impossible second, the warehouse, the armed men, the dead lamps, the entire ruined world narrowed to the tiny gold flame between us and the fact that he had not let go. Almost. Again. Then voices erupted near the loading doors. A body hit concrete, Tio swore. Dante released me instantly, all the heat cut out of the moment like wire severed. Behind me. He moved before I obeyed, lighter snapping shut, gun already in his hand from somewhere under his coat. The sound of it made my stomach drop harder than the sight. A man stumbled from between two crates, not one of ours. Thin, frantic, knife in hand. He saw me. That was his mistake. Dante crossed the distance without hurry and took the knife away from him so efficiently it looked like the end of an argument, not the beginning of violence. One turn. One strike. The man dropped with a broken sound and did not get up. I stood there shaking in Dante's coat while Teo checked the perimeter and Johnny announced to no one in particular. Dear Lord, thank you for not letting me die in a warehouse because I ate one almond and lost my spiritual protection. Nobody laughed. Then Maria's towel, folded in my bag because she had pushed it there for practical women, appeared in Dante's hand. He wrapped it around my thumb with surprising gentleness. You don't like blood, I said before I could stop myself. Something crossed his face, gone too quickly to name. No, he said. Why? A pause, then, quietly. Because crowded rooms don't always notice it in time. That was all. No speech, no confession. just one line with a grave underneath it. When he finished bandaging my hand, he kept his fingers around it half a second too long. Then he let go. And somewhere beyond the warehouse walls, thunder moved over the lake. Chapter 5. The painting that bled. The storm arrived just after midnight and sat on the villa roof like an accusation. Rain struck the windows in disciplined waves. Somewhere in the house a door opened and shut again, making old hinges talk. Sleep refused me. So did peace. My father's name had always been a bruise. I learned to dress around. Marco Bellini, gifted craftsman, probable thief, dead in a warehouse fire. End of file. People in Como loved quiet scandals, respectable enough to gossip over wine, distant enough not to demand justice. I had spent 2 years angry at a dead man for leaving me his disgrace. Now Dante Salvatore had put a different possibility in the room and walked away from it as if it were not enough to crack a daughter open. At 1 a.m, I gave up on sleep, wrapped myself in a cardigan, and took the hidden page I had not shown anyone from the lining of my old coat. That was my secret. 2 days after my father died, I had found it stitched behind the seam. A sliver of vellum with a sketched frame profile, a date, and 4 words in his hand. Not the saint. The mother. I had never understood it. I had never shown it to anyone because keeping one thing from the men who investigated his death felt like the last loyal act available to me. Now it felt like a fuse. I brought it to the restoration room at dawn and found Dante already there. Of course he was. He stood by the long table in shirt sleeves, the silver lighter on the wood beside an untouched espresso. The room smelled of lamp heat and coffee and old varnish. When I entered, his gaze went first to my face, then to the paper in my hand. "What is it?" "My secret," I said. A long beat. Then he pulled out the nearest chair for me without comment. That undid me more than if he had praised my honesty. I sat and laid the vellum down. I found it in my coat after my father died. I didn't know what it meant. He read the words once. His jaw set. The mother. The Madonna panel in the warehouse. Yes. You knew? I suspected. I laughed once, tired and mean. It must be restful, being right this often. No. That surprised me enough to look up. He was watching the sketch line on the vellum, not me. Being right usually means I'm late. I did not know what to do with that. So I did what I always did when emotion got too close. I worked. The Madonna panel came out of storage again, under brighter lamps with solvents and swabs and the patience my father had taught me. I cleaned a band of filthy varnish from the lower border. Beneath the grime, a line of newer gesso showed where the wood had been lifted and resealed. Here, I said. Dante braced the frame while I opened the concealed edge. Inside was not another slip. It was a tiny lead tube sealed with wax. I held it up. Dante took it with a care that was almost reverent. When he opened it, a narrow strip of rolled paper slid into his palm. Not accounting this time. A list of names, some I did not know. One I did. Lucia Salvatore. I looked at Dante so sharply my neck hurt. He had gone very still. Who was Lucia? I asked, though I knew. My sister. Rain whispered at the windows. Somewhere in the villa, a clock measured a terrible amount of silence. Why is her name on this? I asked. He did not answer. I reached for the paper. He let me take it. The other names formed a pattern when I looked long enough. Caterers, florists, a pastry supplier, 2 security contractors, 1 doctor. Beside each, dates and amounts. This is event planning, I said slowly. No. It is if the events were galas. His gaze snapped to my face. I traced the line under Lucia's name. Your sister died at a party. A muscle moved in his jaw. Yes. The realization came in pieces too ugly to be dramatic. My father hid records of the people paid around that night. Yes. Why? Because he found out the guest list wasn't the only thing arranged. The room chilled. You think her death was planned? I think Caruso never wastes chaos when he can manufacture it. I set the paper down carefully because my hands had gone unreliable, and my father knew. He knew enough to hide this, and that got him killed. Yes, there it was. Not softened. Not generous. Truth, like a blade laid flat on a table between us. I should have cried then. Instead, I asked, "Why didn't you tell me before?" "Because grief makes people reckless. I'm already here." "Yes," he said quietly, "and I'm trying to keep you that way." The words pressed somewhere under my ribs. I did not invite them in. I looked back at the Madonna panel. The crack along her chest had opened under age, but not split the gold. The surface looked whole. The structure beneath it was not. "She's wrong," I murmured. Dante frowned. "Who? The painter, or maybe whoever restored her before my father." I touched the damaged edge. "The gold is perfect up here, but the wood beneath is swelling. If you only repair the surface, she breaks from the inside." He said nothing. I heard my own voice continue, softer now, turning the object in my hands into something too close to confession. "You have to open her completely. Remove what looks intact. Treat the hidden damage first. Otherwise, the beautiful part becomes the pressure point." Silence. Then Johnny from the open doorway said with tragic solemnity, "Boss, if that was a metaphor, I would like it noted that I felt attacked on a spiritual level." I jerked, startled. He held a tray with 2 coffees and 1 plate of almond biscuits he was clearly not supposed to be eating. Maria appeared behind him, saw the biscuit, and took it out of his hand without breaking stride. "One day," he whispered to her, retreating back, devastated, "one day you will understand my heart." Maria did not turn. "Your heart is underdeveloped from avoiding vegetables." I laughed before I could stop myself. Dante's eyes lifted from the Madonna to my face. That warmth was worse than any threat. Then Sophia entered, took one look at the list, and went pale in a way disciplined people rarely allowed. Only 6 people knew about the Lucia file. Dante's entire body changed, not visibly to anyone who did not know to look. To me, by then, unmistakably. Betrayal had entered the room. Chapter 6. The safe house door war announced itself with broken glass. Not the delicate bright kind from a party, the ugly kind from a rifle round punching through a villa window at breakfast and turning sunlight into a spray of knives. Tio had me on the floor before I understood the sound. The table overturned over us. Maria screamed somewhere down the corridor. Men shouted in Italian sharp enough to cut skin. Another shot, another. The house, so controlled in peace, transformed with terrifying speed. Hidden doors opened. Guards appeared from walls I had thought were walls. Dante came through the breakfast room entrance already armed, coat unbuttoned, expression emptied down to purpose. "Move," he said. Tio hauled me up. We ran bent low through the servants' corridor, while somewhere behind us return fire cracked across the lake-facing windows. My feet slipped on stone. Dante caught my elbow without looking, steering me around a corner, through a pantry, down 2 steps, through a steel-lined door disguised as oak. The safe passage smelled of concrete, damp, and old electricity. "Johnny has the car," Dante said. "Teo, rear." We burst out into the underground garage. Gianni stood by a black SUV with an assault rifle in one hand and a face suggesting this was deeply inconvenient. "I would like recorded," he said as Teo shoved me inside, "that I had exactly half a boiled egg before bullets started and now my metabolism is under attack." "Drive," Dante said. We tore out through a service tunnel and onto a narrow road climbing above the lake. I twisted in my seat just in time to see smoke bloom from one wing of the villa. My throat closed. "Maria alive," Teo said from beside me, blood on his sleeve that might not have been his. "Sophia too." I exhaled once. Not enough. The road narrowed. Trees closed over us. Rain began and thin cold strikes on the windshield. A motorcycle appeared in the rearview mirror. Then a second. Johnny cursed. "Oh, absolutely not." Gunfire burst behind us. Dante pushed me down across the seat with one hand, his body covering mine before I could protest. The move was so instinctive, it stole breath more effectively than fear. Shots pinged off reinforced metal. Glass starred but held. Stay down, he said. I could smell rain on his coat. Smoke. That colder note of outside dark beneath the cedar. My cheek pressed against the hard line of his thigh. One of his hands bracketed the back of my head, not gentle, protective with the violence of necessity. Almost every thought I had dissolved into the single, impossible fact that he had chosen my body over his own without hesitation. Johnny swerved. If I die before Maria admits she loves me, I will haunt this family forever. Focus, Tio snapped, firing through a lowered slit in the rear window. The motorcycle vanished in a bloom of sparks. The second drew level. Dante moved off me only to lean out and fire once. Efficient, not loud in the dramatic way films lied about. Worse controlled. The bike fishtailed and flipped into trees. My stomach lurched. I had seen him dangerous before, not like this. Not at full reach. Not with death obeying him so quickly it looked practiced enough to be language. We made the mountain safe house by noon. Stone house. 2 rooms. Forest behind it, lake somewhere far below. The kind of place built for weather and bad decisions. Once inside, everything quieted too abruptly. Adrenaline had nowhere to go. Mine turned traitor in my bones. I tried to help Tio bandage his shoulder and nearly dropped the gauze. Sit, Dante said. I'm fine. You're shaking. I said I'm fine. My voice broke on the last word. That was what did it. Not the bullets. Not the smoke. Not his hand over my head in the car. My own voice, cracking open in front of him, as if fear embarrassed me more than violence did. He sent Teo outside to check the perimeter. Gianni to the generator, muttering about protein deprivation under combat conditions. Then, Dante turned back to me. The kitchen of the safe house was tiny. 1 wooden table. 1 iron stove. Rain at the window. His lighter sat near the sink, silver against scarred pine. I stood by the counter gripping it with both hands because if I let go, I might shake apart. He came close, not touching. Look at me, Mercy. I did. I'm sorry, I said, and had no idea what I meant. His brow drew in. For what? For seeing what you are, and I swallowed, and not knowing what that makes me. Something changed in his face. Not softened. Opened by force. He lifted 1 hand, slow enough for refusal. Touched 1 knuckle under my chin. It makes you alive. My eyes burned. That embarrassed me too. I'm not afraid of you, I whispered, which was not the same thing as being brave. His gaze dropped to my mouth and stayed there 1 fatal beat. Then he closed his eyes briefly as if suffering through his own restraint. Almost. Again. When he opened them, the darkness in them had changed shape. I should not do this, he said, then don't. The answer came too quickly. Too softly. It meant the opposite of itself. So obviously I wanted the floor to split. His thumb brushed the line of my jaw. Adriana. I had never heard my name sound like something held in both hands. I don't know what this is, I said, and that cost me more than any polished declaration would have. He exhaled once. Rough, that night, he said quietly. In the ballroom, you heard me call for you and still kept pressure on that girl's hand. You didn't even look at me. Everyone in my world looks at me first. Fear. Greed. Need. You looked at blood and thought help before power. His thumb moved once. Barely. That was the end of me. My breath caught. He had admitted it. Not to me, maybe. Not fully. But enough. Dante. He kissed me before I could fail the moment by understanding it. Not hard. Not hungry. Just enough to make my knees go weak from what he did not take. His mouth moved once over mine and stopped there, as if he had reached a line he would cross only if I crossed it too. I felt the restraint in him like heat under skin. 1 hand came to the counter beside my hip. The other stayed at my jaw, steady, reverent in a way that hurt more than hunger would have. When I did not pull away, he kissed me again. Still gentle, still controlled. But this time his breath caught, and I felt the fracture in it. the quiet violence of wanting. My fingers closed in the fabric at his waist before I understood I had moved. That one small surrender nearly undid him. His forehead touched mine. His eyes stayed shut. "Mercy," he said. And the name no longer sounded like accusation. It sounded like prayer said by a man who no longer believed in safe things. A pounding hit the front door. Once. Twice. Urgent. Dante stepped back at once, the warmth in the room cut cleanly in half. The loss of it was so immediate my body registered it as cold. Johnny's voice came through the wood. "Boss, Sophia's on the radio." Dante swore under his breath and crossed the room. I stayed where I was, fingers still curled, mouth unsteady. He opened the door a fraction. Sophia's voice crackled from the handset in Gianni's grip, thin with interference and fury. "They hit the docks," she said. "And one of our finance houses in Milan. Caruso wants us moving. He wants us bleeding in public." Dante's face went empty in that terrible efficient way again. "How bad?" A pause. Then Sophia said, "Aldo's missing." Something in Dante's expression did not break. It hardened around the outline of it. He looked back at me once. Not long. Long enough. Then he took his lighter from the table, flicked it open, shut it, and slid it back into his pocket like a man holstering thought. "Stay inside," he said. "I should have asked questions. I should have demanded answers, explanations, the dignity of being consulted in matters that had already swallowed me whole. Instead, I looked at him and understood one thing with terrifying clarity. The kiss had changed nothing outside that kitchen, only everything inside it. War had arrived. Chapter 7. The boat ticket. By evening, the safe house had become a relay point for bad news. Men came in wet from the rain, spoke low to Tio, and left with weapons, maps, new instructions. Sophia arrived after dark with a split lip and a folder of names. She looked at me once, nodded once, and went straight to Dante. Johnny brought everyone coffee and complained like a saint being martyred by logistics. "I haven't had a proper meal in 10 hours, he announced to the room at large. At this point, if Maria handed me plain lettuce, I would propose. From the far end of the table, Sophia said, "Please don't. The woman has suffered enough." Johnny pressed a hand to his chest. "See, this is why I'm emotionally unavailable. Hostility." No one laughed except me, and even that came out thin. Dante's gaze lifted at the sound, just for a second, then back to the map spread beneath his hands. He had been different with me since the kitchen. Not colder. More careful, which was somehow worse. He gave me information now. Small pieces. Enough to function, not enough to soothe. Aldo Greco, I learned, had been Dante's father's closest friend and later his chief of finance. He had held Dante upright after Lucia died. He had taught him which bankers could be bought and which priests could not. He had vanished 3 hours before the first coordinated attacks. "Maybe he's dead," I said quietly. Dante folded the map once. Maybe. He did not believe it. I could hear that. Neither did Sophia. "Aldo signed off on 2 warehouse transfers last month that I did not request," she said. "At the time I thought it was caution. Now I think it was cover." The room went still. Tio rubbed a hand over the back of his neck. "He bounced me on inspections twice, said the boss ordered it." Dante looked at him. "I didn't." Teo's mouth flattened. "I know that now." There it was. Betrayal in pieces. Not a twist, not a theatrical unveil. The slow, awful realization that trust had worn a familiar face. I should have stayed in the corner and absorbed it like furniture. Instead I said, "If Aldo handled finance, he knows where the altered ledgers go." Sophia looked at me sharply. "Yes. And if Caruso is pressing for movement, he still wants something." Dante's eyes came to me. "Me." I shook my head. "No. If he wanted only you, he'd keep shooting until one side ran out of walls. He wants records contained. Cleaned." I pointed to the folder. "He wants what my father hid." Sophia considered that without softening. "She's right." A strange, stupid flicker of satisfaction went through me. It died almost immediately when Dante said, which is why she leaves tonight. The air changed. I stared at him. No, yes, you don't get to make that decision for me. I just did. The words struck hard enough to bring anger back where fear had been. Useful. Anger. Brighter. Easier to carry. You lock doors and call it protection. You send men with guns and call it safety. But this, I heard my own voice rise and hated it. You do not get to remove me from my own life because your enemy learned my name. His expression did not shift. Only his hand, resting flat on the table, tightened once. Your life, he said quietly, is exactly what I'm trying to preserve. Before I could answer, gunfire tore across the forest outside. The first burst shattered the kitchen window. Teo moved before the glass landed. He drove Sophia down behind the table, knocked me backward toward the interior wall, and turned into the second burst instead of away from it. He made a sound I will hear until I die. Not loud, surprised. Blood hit the floorboards in 3 dark drops before the rest of him followed. Teo. I was already on my knees beside him. His shoulder was ruined red. Not the chest, thank God. Not the chest. The relief came so hard it made me sick. Dante and Sophia were moving, firing, shouting, ending the attack with the speed of people who had no space left for panic. Johnny dragged the table on its side and yelled, I swear to God, if I die before my wedding to carbohydrates, I will be furious. I pressed my hands over Teo's shoulder wound. Blood pushed hot between my fingers. Stay with me, I said. Trying, he managed, face white under olive skin. Hurts. That's inconvenient, I said, voice shaking. I need you annoying. He laughed once, then grimaced. Dante dropped to one knee on my other side. Our hands nearly touched over Teo's blood. He looked at the pressure I was holding, at the steadiness I did not feel, and something passed through his face so fast it was almost invisible. The truck's clear, Sophia said from the doorway. We move now. No, I said. Dante looked at me. I looked back. He bleeds out if you move him badly. Sophia snapped. We stay and we all bleed out. Then give me 60 seconds. Dante did not argue. He stripped his overshirt off, wadded it hard, and handed it to me. I changed the angle of pressure, packed the wound, wrapped, tied. Teo hissed between his teeth. Good, I said, though my hands were slippery and my heart had become an animal. Good, breathe. Dante slid an arm under Teo's back. Now. We made it to the truck under cover of rain and muzzle flashes. By dawn we had crossed the lake and reached an old boathouse safe site hidden under cypress and fog. Teo was alive. Pale, furious, medicated. Maria arrived an hour later and cried over him while pretending she was only angry. I stood in the boathouse doorway watching gray water knock at old pilings and understood with a coldness I could not bargain with what being close to Dante cost. Teo had taken a bullet because I mattered to the man others wanted wounded. That was the message. Not subtle. Not survivable, forever. Maria found me there after noon with a wool coat and a folded envelope. He will send you away, she said. I looked at her. You say that like a warning. It is. She pressed the envelope into my hand. Jenny arranged a boat, then a train, Florence. Your employer has cousins there. Inside was a ticket, a real one, name, departure, time. My old life reduced to paper and possibility. You helped? Child. Her lined face softened. Men like Dante save what they love by putting it far from themselves. They do not ask whether distance is another kind of wound. The words landed too close. I left at dusk. No one stopped me. That, more than anything, made the choice real. Jamie drove me to the little station above the ferry dock in miserable silence, both hands tight on the wheel. When he pulled over, he did not look at me. If you tell Maria I cried, I'll deny it. You didn't cry. He sniffed. Yet. The station smelled of wet stone and diesel. One yellow light buzzed over the platform. My train ticket softened in my damp hand. Gianni got out and opened the trunk. My small bag sat inside. Repaired dress. Father's vellum. A sweater Maria had packed without asking. "You can still come with me?" I said quietly. He stared at me as if I had suggested arson. "And leave the boss? Absolutely not. Who would remind him he's impossible?" I smiled despite the ache in me. Janie looked toward the dark tracks. "He didn't want you seeing Teo like that." "That isn't the same as asking what I want." "No?" His mouth went crooked. "It's not." The train light appeared far down the line. This was it, the clean exit. The version of my life where I chose sense, daylight, restoration work, rooms without guns, men whose silence meant shyness instead of controlled violence. I could step onto that train and become Adriana Bellini again. Not mercy. Not leverage. Not the woman blood had marked in a ballroom. Then I remembered Teo on the floor. Maria at the boathouse. Sophia with dried blood on her lip and no complaint in her mouth. I remembered Dante in the kitchen, kissing me like restraint was a form of worship. And in the car, covering my body with his own before his was safe. And beneath all of it, harder than desire and uglier than fear, I remembered my father's name. If I left now, Caruso still owned the story of him. If I left now, Dante would go into war carrying my father's dead secrets alone. If I left now, I would spend the rest of my life restoring other people's damage while refusing the one place I could choose mine with open eyes. The train screamed into the station. I tore the ticket cleanly in half. Johnny exhaled a curse that sounded almost like prayer. "This," he said, watching me drop the pieces into the wet, "is a terrible decision." "Yes," I said. Then I picked up my bag, turned away from the train, and walked back toward the lake. I went back. Chapter 8. The Chapel Key. The boathouse was empty when I returned. Not abandoned. Recently emptied. One coffee cup still warm on the crate table. A damp hand towel near the sink. A radio left hissing with no one to answer it. My pulse started beating in the wrong places. "Hello?" Nothing. Then, from the inner office, a familiar voice said, "Thank God." Aldo Greco stepped into the doorway with his coat half-buttoned and rain silvering his hair at the temples. In the 2 brief times I had seen him before, he had struck me as the sort of man old families relied on, elegant, soft-spoken, almost invisible until needed. He looked relieved now. Tired. Believable. "You shouldn't be here," he said. "I came back." His gaze dropped briefly to the torn edge of the ticket in my hand. "I see that. Where is everyone?" "Moved. Caruso's men found the perimeter." He took my bag from me before I could decide whether to object. "Dante sent Sophia with Tio to the city clinic. He went ahead to the chapel estate. There are more records there." The chapel estate. Something in me recognized the phrase before I knew why. Then the vellum in my coat pocket seemed to warm against my ribs. Not the saint. The mother. "Which chapel?" I asked. "San Bartolomeo. North Ridge." He smiled faintly. "You know the old roads?" "I grew up in Como." "Good. We'll take the lower pass." I should have asked why Dante had not sent Johnny, or Sophia, or anyone whose face I knew better than the outline of second-hand trust. I should have noticed that the radio hissed without voices because the battery had been removed. I should have told myself that men did not survive beside mafia bosses for decades by being harmless. Instead, I got into Aldo's car. That was my mistake. Halfway up the ridge road, he locked the doors with a soft mechanical snap. I felt it immediately. My hand went to the handle. "What are you doing?" He kept his eyes on the road. "Saving us both some noise?" Cold spread from my throat downward. "Aldo, please don't scream," he said almost kindly. "I've always disliked melodrama." The forest closed around the car and black wet walls. No houses, no lights, only the road and the sound of rain under the tires. "You're the traitor." Such an ugly word. You let them hit the villa. I let inevitability arrive on schedule. My nails dug into my palms. "Dante trusted you." Yes, Aldo said softly. That has been the problem for years. He turned off the ridge road onto a narrow lane lined with cypress. At the end stood a tiny stone chapel with no exterior lights and one bell tower black against the clouds. San Bartolomeo. Memory hit me so hard it blurred the windshield. I had come here once with my father when I was 13. He had spent 4 hours studying a cracked Madonna in the side altar while I counted swallows in the rafters and complained about dust. Not the saint. The mother. My father had hidden something here too. Aldo saw understanding move across my face and sighed. Marco Bellini should have kept loving wood and paint. Men like him always think conscience is private. It never is. You killed him. No. Caruso ordered it. I merely stopped interfering. The distinction sat in the air like rot. He parked beside the chapel and killed the engine. Rain hammered the roof. Out, he said. I did not move. He turned then, and for the first time I saw the man beneath the cultivated patience, not theatrical evil, worse. A person who had turned self-interest into philosophy. You want Dante to survive this? He asked. Then you will help me retrieve what your father hid. And if I don't? His expression altered by half a degree. Then I send Caruso the message he has wanted since the ballroom, that mercy can bleed too. I got out. The chapel smelled of wet stone, candle soot, and old plaster. Aldo led me past the nave to the side altar, where the Madonna still stood under cloudy varnish, her blue robe darkened by age. My pulse beat under my tongue. There, he said. Open it. No. He took out a pistol. Not waved, not dramatized, simply held. I walked to the altar. The old restoration seam was still visible under the frame edge, just where my father would have left it. My hand shook once, then steadied as work took over. Blade. Lift. Pressure. Hidden channel. Inside the lower rail sat a small iron key wrapped in linen. Aldo took it from my palm. Thank you. For what? For proving Dante was right to keep you close. The back chapel door opened. Vittorio Caruso entered like a man late to dinner, not to treachery. He was older than Dante by 20 years, silver at the temples, handsome in the dry, finished way of men who had turned cruelty into refinement. His umbrella dripped onto the stone. 2 armed men followed him and shut the door. He looked at me, then at Aldo, then smiled without warmth. So this is the girl. I hated how calm he made himself look. You killed Lucia, I said. The smile remained. No, I arranged a room in which sentiment could do what bullets would have made vulgar. My stomach twisted. Aldo handed him the key. The crypt vault, just as Marco marked. Caruso turned the key over in his fingers. And Dante? On the South Road. He'll come when he realizes she's gone. Good. Caruso's gaze returned to me. A man is easiest to break in the shape of his favorite error. My hand closed around the thin lifting blade still hidden in my sleeve. Do not break, I told myself. Not because no one was coming. Because I was still here. Caruso stepped closer. Did he tell you why he noticed you? Yes. A flicker of irritation crossed his eyes. How unlike him. He told me enough. Then let me tell you the rest. He glanced at the Madonna. Your father wanted to expose us after Lucia died. Dante's father wanted peace. Aldo wanted survival. And I wanted a successor who understood that mercy is wrought in the beams. Dante has always been too close to softness. His gaze sharpened. You are proof. The insult should have frightened me. Instead, rage arrived clean as glass. I'm proof, I said, that not everyone in your world looks at power first. Caruso's expression thinned. That gave me more strength than it should have. He nodded to one of the men. Tie her. They took me to the bell tower room above the nave. Rope around wrists. Ankles, not too tight. Professionals then. Aldo avoided my eyes. That, somehow, hurt more than Caruso's interest. When they left, I twisted the lifting blade from my sleeve into my bound hand. Below me, through the tower grating, I heard the chapel doors open again. Then Dante's voice, low and lethal. Too late had entered the building. Chapter 9. The bell tower rope burns hurt less than helplessness. That was the first useful thing I learned in the bell tower. The second was that old lifting blades, if narrow enough and hidden in a sleeve long enough, could saw halfway through fiber before the skin split open. My wrists burned, my fingers cramped, rain rattled the louvers beside the bell. Through the grating in the floor I could see the chapel below in fractured pieces, the edge of pews, the altar rail, a slice of candle stand, shadow moving where men stood with guns and bad intentions. Dante's voice reached me first. "You brought her to a church," he said. "How sentimental." Caruso laughed once. "You mistake architecture for conscience." I kept sawing. The rope gave by one strand, then another. Below, Aldo said quietly, "Listen, before you choose anger, ragazzo." Ragazzo. Boy. My chest tightened at the intimacy of it. Dante had let this man call him that once, maybe since childhood, maybe since before grief had hardened his face into what it became at parties and tables and funerals. That was the real cost, I thought. Not only death, not only violence, the betrayal always arriving in a familiar voice. "I chose," Dante said. Silence answered him. Not fear, recognition. I worked the blade faster. Caruso spoke again. "Lucia should never have been at that gala unsupervised. Your father's weakness put her in the hall. Your weakness keeps bringing women into rooms built for consequences." Something hit wood hard below. A chair? A fist? I could not tell. Dante's voice dropped lower. "Worse for it. Do not say her name again." I got one hand free. The relief almost made me cry. Instead, I bent forward, hiding the motion from the tower stairs, and cut at the knot around my ankles while listening for footsteps. None came. Men trusted rope too much. Caruso went on, as if he enjoyed the sound of his own philosophy. "You think I wanted Lucia dead? No. I wanted your father reminded that family is a liability and softness is contagious." He was negotiating like a priest. She wandered where she should not. Things happen. The rope at my ankles parted. I stood too quickly and caught myself on the bell frame before it could ring. "Below," Aldo said. "Vittorio." One word. Warning. Then Dante, very calm. "Step away from him." I moved to the tower door. Locked from outside. Of course, the room held almost nothing. A stool, coils of older rope. A dust-covered wooden saint missing one hand. I looked at the bell rope, then at the rusted hinge pins, then at the thin plaster wall behind the saint. Work. Always work. I shoved the saint off its bracket. It hit the wall and broke through the wet softened plaster between tower and stairwell with a choking crash. Shouts below. Good. I jammed the lifting blade into the damaged seam and kicked. Stone dust burst. A shoulder-width gap opened into the narrow spiral stairs beyond. My hands were bleeding. I hardly felt it. As I squeezed through, one of Caruso's men started up the tower stairs 2 at a time. I flattened against the wall and waited until his shoulder appeared first. Then I drove the lifting blade into the side of his neck. Not deep enough to kill. Deep enough to end the climb. He fell backward with a scream, taking 2 more steps with him in a tangle of limbs and gunmetal. Their shots punched splinters from old wood and stone. Below, chaos broke open. I ran down the spiral toward it. Dante saw me first. I knew because every other motion in the chapel lost meaning when his face changed. Not relief exactly, something harsher. Relief sharpened into fury because I had been where his enemy could reach me. "Down," he snapped. I dropped behind the side altar as shots cracked across the nave. Aldo turned toward me. Shock plain on his face for the first time all night. Good. Let him have one unfamiliar feeling before he died. Caruso backed toward the crypt door with the iron key in hand. Tail. One arm strapped, somehow here anyway, fired from the rear chapel entrance. Sophia came through the sacristy like judgment in a navy suit. Gianni, unbelievably, had a shotgun and the expression of a man personally offended by destiny. "No one," he yelled over the gunfire, "is allowed to die in a bell tower before I have dinner again." The absurdity almost knocked laughter out of me. Aldo reached for me instead of the door. That was his second mistake. I grabbed the heavy brass candlestick from the altar and swung with both hands. It caught him at the temple. He staggered. Dante crossed the space between them and put Aldo on the floor with one clean strike that sounded heartbreakingly like finality. Caruso fled through the crypt door. Everything after that happened too fast for order and too slowly for mercy. Dante dropped to one knee in front of me. His hands framed my face, checked my wrists, my throat, my shoulders, as if verifying each part against disaster. No words, none needed. Blood marked my sleeve. His thumb paused over it. "Not mine," I said. His eyes shut for one beat. When they opened, he bent his forehead to mine, hard enough to hurt a little. The contact was desperate, wordless, raw, exactly as grief is raw past elegance, past defense. Then he stood. The change in him was frightening. "Take her out," he said without looking away from the crypt. "I can walk," I said. He did look then. Just once. "Mercy," he said, and the name shook. Not with softness. With the force it took him to leave me breathing and still turn back toward violence. I caught his wrist before he could go. "He wants you angry." "I know." "Then don't become him." Something passed between us there, quicker than speech and truer. Then he looked at my hand on his wrist and covered it with his own for half a second. Almost. Even now. Then he was gone into the crypt with Tio and Sophia behind him. Deniti. He had imagined this room 100 ways on the drive up the ridge. Her dead. Broken. Gone. He had not imagined her coming down the bell tower stairs with blood on her hands and fire in her eyes, because some part of him, the part Caruso hated most, still forgot that mercy did not freeze. She chose. She fought. And that made what he had to do next worse, because if he survived it, he would have to deserve the fact that she came back. Caruso escaped the crypt through a tunnel that ran under the old graveyard and out toward the lake road. But he did not leave empty-handed. Sophia found the vault broken open and 3 ledger boxes gone. "He's heading for the memorial gala," she said, breathing hard. "Tomorrow night. Palazzo Viscara. He'll burn the records, and whoever remains attached to them." The same palazzo where Dante had first seen me kneeling in glass. The shape of it settled over us all at once. Full circle, trap inside echo. Tio leaned against the crypt wall, white as candle wax. Then we finish it there. Dante looked at the black tunnel mouth, then at the blood drying on my wrists, then back to the dark. For the first time since I had known him, uncertainty showed, only for a second. It was enough, because we both understood then that the next room might keep only one of us. Chapter 10, the ballroom again. The second time I entered Palazzo Viscara, I knew where the exits were. That felt like a moral injury all by itself. The chandeliers were lit, the orchids had been replaced. Fresh champagne stood in silver buckets. Wealth had no shame about repetition. It simply changed flowers and pretended old blood did not stain under polish. This time I did not arrive as hired help. I arrived in a black dress Maria chose because, in her words, if men insist on building their wars and beautiful rooms, let them at least suffer while looking at you. Johnny, adjusting his cufflinks in the mirrored antechamber, said, "I would like it noted that Maria threatened me with a bread knife, and I still think she's perfect." "She didn't threaten you," Sophia said, checking the line of the pistol hidden at her back. "She corrected your behavior." Johnny sighed. "Exactly, romance." I laughed, quietly. It felt borrowed from another life. Dante stood near the far door speaking to Teo in low Italian. Black suit, white shirt. No tie again. The same clothes almost as the first night. But not the same man. Not after the chapel. Not after touching my face like he was making sure I existed. He looked over when I entered. The room changed. I had thought that was legend the first time, It was not. Men shifted when Dante turned his attention anywhere. Tonight, the shift ran hotter, stripped of pretense. Everyone in our small circle knew this was not a party. It was a hunting ground, disguised by crystal. He crossed to me before I could decide whether my heartbeat counted as betrayal. At arm's length, he stopped. His gaze moved once over the dress, not possessive, not public, protective and furious at the same time. "You're not happy," I murmured. "No." "Because I'm here?" "Yes." "Too bad." A breath almost became a smile at one corner of his mouth. "Almost." He adjusted the clasp at my wrist instead of touching skin. "If anything changes, Johnny takes you east, Sophia north. You stay between them." "And you?" His eyes held mine. "I end it." There were speeches available in that moment. Things about not leaving him. Things about love, though I had still not named that word aloud. Instead, I said the only honest thing. "Come back from it." Something in his face answered me too deeply to be safe. The music began. Guests drifted. Men lied. Women glittered. A senator kissed the air beside my cheek and failed to recognize me from the night I had knelt at his shoes. That felt instructive. Caruso arrived 20 minutes late. Of course he did. He entered through the north doors with 3 men and the polished ease of an elder statesman. A few heads turned. Several did not, because they already knew. That was the thing about corrupt rooms. Revelation rarely shocked the guilty. Aldo was with him. Alive. My stomach dropped so hard it bruised. His left temple bore a livid mark from the candlestick. One arm was in a sling. He met my eyes across the ballroom and did not look away. Dante saw him 2 seconds later. The temperature of the room changed without the room understanding why. Sophia murmured into her cuff. Men repositioned along the walls. Tio vanished toward the west corridor. Gianni said with appalling feeling, "I hate family betrayals. They ruin hors d'oeuvres." Then Caruso raised his glass. "Shall we stop pretending?" he asked pleasantly. The ballroom went silent. Dante stepped forward. No speech, no display, just one man moving into the center of a room because the room had always belonged to the one most willing to pay for it. Caruso smiled at him across 12 feet of polished floor. "Your father liked this room. You killed my sister in it. Your father killed her the moment he believed affection could soften negotiations." The lie was elegant. That made it worse. Dante's expression did not move. "You used her to punish him." "I used an opening," Caruso corrected. "You still romanticize weakness." Aldo spoke then, and I wished he had not. "Dante." Dante turned his head. That was all. Aldo flinched as if struck. "Don't," Dante said. "One word, final." Caruso sighed. "There it is, the wound talking like virtue." He reached into his jacket. The first shot came from the balcony. Chaos detonated. Guests screamed and dropped. Glass burst. Music died in a long mechanical whine. Men on both sides drew and fired, and the ballroom became at once exactly what it had always threatened to be. Johnny shoved me behind an overturned drinks cart. "If I survive this," he yelled over the gunfire, "I'm eating an entire loaf in front of Maria out of principle." Sophia fired twice from behind a marble column. Tio took a man down near the stairs. I crawled through spilled champagne and broken stems toward the west side where, under the service niche, I had seen the ledger boxes being staged. Not because I was brave. Because my father had died for paper hidden in wood, and if those boxes burned, so did the only clean part of his name. A guard saw me and moved. I threw a silver ice bucket into his knees. He went down swearing. I snatched his fallen gun, hated the weight of it, and used the butt instead of the trigger when he lunged again. Pain shot up my arm. Worth it. I reached the boxes. Locked, of course. Then I remembered the iron key Caruso had used at the crypt, and looked toward him just in time to see Dante and Aldo collide near the base of the grand staircase. Not fight. Collide, like grief taking physical form. Aldo was older, slower, one arm compromised. Dante should have ended it quickly, he didn't. Because this was not any enemy, this was a man who had tied his first tie after funerals, a man who had stood behind him at Lucia's grave. That hesitation cost. Aldo's knife flashed. Dante caught his wrist, but not before the blade cut along his ribs. I made a sound I did not know I could make. Dante took the knife away and held it there between them. Not in Aldo, between, the last chance. Aldo looked at him and said, "Horse now, all pretense gone. I kept you alive." Dante's face closed around something that would never open again. "No," he said, "you kept me useful." Then he drove the knife in, once. Aldo folded to the floor. I felt the cost of it all the way across the room. Caruso saw it too. That was his mistake. He smiled. Dante turned toward that smile like the world had narrowed to one payable debt. I got the key from Caruso's dropped coat while he fired at Teo and missed. Opened the ledger box, thrust the first sheaf of papers into Sophia's hands when she slid beside me. "Enough," I shouted. "Enough to bury him," she said. Caruso heard that. He ran for the south balcony. Dante intercepted him under the chandeliers. The fight was short, ugly, human. No elegance left in it. Caruso was skilled, older, ruthless. Dante was bleeding and past patience. They went into the broken glass together. In the end, it was not brute force that won. It was refusal. Caruso reached for the fallen pistol first. Dante kicked it away, caught him by the throat, and looked down into the face of the man who had built half his life out of doctrine and half out of damage. "You told me mercy was rot," Dante said. Caruso smiled blood into his teeth. "And now?" Dante's hand tightened. "Now I know the difference between mercy and you." Then he ended it. Not loudly. Not theatrically. Certainly, when the police sirens finally rose beyond the gates and the last echo of gunfire died under the ballroom ceiling, I looked at the shattered chandeliers, the overturned flowers, the blood in the same polished room where a waitress had once cut her hand and no one had moved but me. Dante came to me through the ruin. His face was pale, his shirt dark at the ribs, his eyes not the same as before. He stopped in front of me and looked at the blood on my hands, the ledger pages clutched against my chest, the fact that I was still standing. "It's over," I whispered. He closed his eyes once, then opened them and said, "It's over." Chapter 11. The quiet proposal war ended the way storms ended over the lake. Not cleanly. Not all at once. The sky simply ran out of violence and left debris to prove what had passed through. 3 weeks later, the villa smelled of plaster dust, coffee, and antiseptic. One wing remained boarded while repairs went on. Teo wore his arm in a sling and accepted sympathy with the grace of a man being tax audited. Sophia slept in her office twice a week and denied it with professional dignity. Maria ran the kitchen like a sovereign nation. Johnny survived. His first act after surviving was to steal half a loaf of rosemary bread, hold it up in the courtyard like a revolutionary banner, and declare, "If love will not nourish me, carbohydrates must." Maria hit him with a dish towel so hard even Dante looked away to hide the beginning of amusement. "I hate him," she said. "You do not," I told her. She sniffed. "No, unfortunately." Johnny heard and nearly walked into a fountain. Ordinary things arrived in fragments after that. A repaired window catching morning light. Fresh invoices instead of secret ledgers. Men knocking before entering rooms I used. My tools laid out on the restoration table as if the house had understood I belonged to its daily rhythms now. I spent most afternoons in the chapel room off the south corridor, restoring the Madonna from San Bartolomeo. The crack through her center had to be opened wider before it could be mended. That still felt like a lesson I had not finished learning. Dante gave me space there. Not distance, space. A different thing entirely. He no longer locked doors. He no longer said where I could and could not go. The first week after the ballroom, I kept waiting for the command in him to return. It did not. Not because he had become gentler, because he had understood, finally, that I had walked back into his world and that anything less than choice would insult us both. That new respect should have calmed me. Instead, it left me feeling perilously seen. One evening, as the house settled into that strange hour between work and dinner, I found him in the West Terrace room with the lake black beyond the glass and his silver lighter unopened in his hand. He stood by the fireplace, but had not lit it. The sight of the unlit room, the lighter, idle, him waiting there as if thinking itself had weight, did something terrible to my heart. "You're bleeding through the bandage again," I said. His gaze dropped to the dressing at his ribs. "Occupational inconvenience." I moved toward him before caution could intervene. "Sit." He did. That still startled me sometimes. That he would listen when it was me. I knelt beside the armchair and peeled back the edge of the bandage. The wound from Aldo's knife had closed badly from overuse and neglect. Of course it had. Dante approached injury like weather, noted, endured, ignored, unless structural collapse seemed likely. "You pulled the stitches," I said. "I was busy." "With refusing rest?" "With rebuilding what remains." I looked up. "You say that like the house is the only thing that broke." He was silent. There were moments with Dante when silence was evasion. This was not one of them. This was the silence of a man standing in front of a locked door, with the key in his hand and no certainty he should use it. So I changed the bandage slowly, gave him the dignity of not speaking first. When I tied the clean linen off, he said, "Aldo taught me to shave." My hands stilled. "He taught me which fort to use in rooms like Viscara, so senators would underestimate me for the correct reasons. He took Lucia to buy sugared almonds when my father forgot she liked them." His eyes stayed on the dark window. "I killed him in the same night I ended Caruso." The grief in his voice was strict of decoration, so bare it made my own breathing careful. "You did both because he left you no honest version of himself," I said softly. A long pause. "Then, do you know what frightens me?" I almost laughed from surprise. Dante Salvatore did not ask questions like that. "No." "That I am capable of understanding him." The answer shook me more than tears would have. Because I understood it too. Aldo had chosen survival over conscience until he could no longer tell the difference. Dante, in another life, with one less sister loved and one less girl kneeling in broken glass, might have called that wisdom. I rested my hands lightly on his knee. Not seduction. Not comfort. Exactly. Contact that admitted witness. "You didn't become him," I said. "No." His gaze came to my face. "Because you walked into a ballroom and told my men someone else needed help before you did." The bookend of it hit me so hard I had to look down for a second. When I did, his lighter sat on the arm of the chair between us, silver in the low lamp glow. He picked it up, clicked it once, and lit the fire at last. The sound no longer meant danger first. It meant I was home. Later, after dinner, when the villa had gone soft was nighttime and Johnny could be heard somewhere outside insisting that Maria had accepted his apology, in a spiritually significant tone. Dante found me again in the chapel room. The Madonna stood cleaned, stabilized, still not finished. Neither, I thought, were we. He came to stand beside me. Not too close. Then closer. "Adriana." I turned. He held no ring box, no rehearsed speech, only a small gold band in his palm worn thin with age. "My mother's," he said. "My father gave it to her after a war they never named properly." I looked at the band, then at him. My heart did something painful and bright. "This isn't a fairy tale," he said. "Trust him to start there." "No," I whispered. "My world will not become safe because I want it to. Loving me will not ever be the easy version of a life." His gaze did not move from mine. "But if you choose this, Mercy, I will spend the rest of mine making sure choice remains yours." That was more romantic than any polished declaration in any safer house. My eyes filled before I could prevent it. I hated crying less these days. That was his fault too. "Yes," I said, and the word came out shaking. "Yes, if you still mean it when things are quiet." His face changed then. "Not dramatically, The kind of change only people in love notice and never recover from. I mean it most when things are quiet. He slid the ring onto my finger. Then he touched his forehead to mine, and in the next room, Johnny shouted, "Maria, if this soup is forgiveness, give me 2 bowls." I laughed against Dante's mouth. At last, he smiled.